Hello, welcome to today's ACE Private Practice with Experts. We have a really exciting guest on today. Nathan is a psychologist who has posted something that has been relatively controversial that I love. And so we've brought him on to talk about all of this information around clinical outcomes, how he's documented it, and basically the journey. And if you haven't seen the infographic that he's created about client outcomes, you can search our Facebook group, or we'll be giving you the details for that a little bit later. But let me bring Nathan in. Hello, how are you?
Hi Tash, how you doing? Lovely to be here.
I'm so well. This is one of my favorite topics, and so I have been so stoked to bring you in.
Thank you so much.
So tell us a little bit about who you are and maybe where you got the idea to track your client outcomes.
Absolutely. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I was working for quite a few years in private practice. I finished it up late last year, and now in public health as well as working in research. Basically, I published all my outcomes in an easily digestible way for clients. And I saw that about 3 years ago by a guy by the name of Tony Grossmanier in America. So I'm certainly not the first to do it. There's a handful of us that have done it. And I just thought it was one of the most amazing things. Tony also, underneath his, has notes from clients, real notes about what they thought when they saw outcomes. Wow. And that in particular it really challenged my assumption on how a client might respond to it. So once I saw that, I started trawling through my own work and my own outcomes, which I was providing the DAS-21 each session with clients. And yeah, after quite a few months, I was able to get some real insights into my treatment, what was working and what's not working.
Because you've actually been doing that. You've been tracking that information for a while. It's not been a few months. It's been the data, if I recall, it's been over a few years. Is that right?
Yeah, so it was about 2 years, just shy of 2 years that I was tracking my routine outcome measurement. And actually you had Ben Buckingham from Novopsych just the other week. I watched it. It was great. I'm a big fan because I've been using Novopsych for quite some years. And that is how, with an iPad, getting my clients each session to tell me about their mood, anxiety, and stress. Once I'd accumulated a lot of that data, I was able to ask Ben to export it to me in an Excel file and kind of start that process of looking through the data itself.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, well, we're going to get into that, but I have some standard sort of questions that I like to ask everyone as a warm-up, get to know you kind of thing. So let me go through our quick Q&A here. Tell me, what book are you reading or listening to?
At the moment, I'm reading a new book by Scott Miller and Daryl Chow. I forget the title exactly, but it's the new book on deliberate practice, Achieving Excellence, I think it's called. And I was lucky enough to get a copy a few months early, so I'm reading that at the moment. And it's fascinating. So if people are interested in deliberate practice, it'll be out in about a month or so.
So they can pre-order, huh?
Yes, exactly.
Tell me, Nathan, if you were to fall safely from a cliff, would you choose to fall with your face first or your back to the ground?
When I saw this question, I was as terrified as actually visualizing what I would do. I'm very afraid of heights, so I wouldn't want to do any of it, but I would have to say back because I just couldn't face seeing the ground coming up that quickly.
Yeah, totally understand that answer. So you've never been skydiving then?
Absolutely not. Could not pay me enough money to do that.
Talking about it, I feel like, is almost just as bad as even doing it.
I think it would be pretty bad once you're up there looking out that door. So yeah, not for me, unfortunately.
Tell me, when was the last time you pushed your comfort zone?
Probably this morning. I do deliberate practice each morning, and I've been working with client videos to very stuck clients and who are really not willing to try anything new, and I find that really out of my comfort zone, so I've been working on that.
And most importantly, cat dog or cat person or dog person? Dog person,
very much.
I'm going to start screening people, and if they say cat person, don't bring them on board.
Well, after you've got a big set of data, I can make you an infographic on where that sits, what percentage of dogs, what percentage of cats.
Don't make that up, because I might take you up on it. I love analytics. So tell us a little bit. Let's kind of get into this. So I actually heard about you from a client of mine who said, "Hey, look, there is a guy in your neck of the woods," that was an American term, she didn't use that term, "that I know from working with and from doing some trainings with, and I think something that he's published would be very of interest to you." And she sent me your Twitter link, and on the Twitter link had this beautiful graphic, infographic about client outcomes and the data, and basically information which was completely digestible in a way of understanding what's happening in therapy for people, and what is their client journey. That's how I really interpreted it. What's happening in their client journey, and ways that you can kind of understand, is the modality that you're using effective, essentially. And so I was like, I have to reach out to this guy. I have to find out who he is. I have to have a conversation. We had a really in-depth conversation about the infograph and the story behind it. Can you tell us a little bit about what your thinking was about publishing it, and really the purpose of the infograph?
Reception, code grey.
I also work in a hospital, so apologies about the code. You'll be hearing some codes, but they wouldn't let me turn that off. So in terms of publishing it, I think for me that was always a dream, but I didn't necessarily know if it was possible. I knew people had done it. I'd seen Tony do it. I'd seen Jason Seidel over at America as well doing it, but I wasn't sure if I could even figure out how to analyze it, let alone publish it. I'm actually not a stats person per se, which is a surprise. But once I was able to get it from Novopsych and it was in Excel, I basically, rather than analyzing it statistically, I spent some weeks writing down questions. Like, what would I actually want to know about my practice and the results? But then I started writing questions, what would a client want to know? And they were probably more informative for me. So my general kind of sense was that clients wanted to know, have I ever met anyone with the issue that they face? Yeah. Am I effective generally? What percentage of my clients improve? But more importantly, from a client's point of view, what percentage of my clients deteriorate or get no change despite coming to treatment? And then also started to think about, does work in between sessions make a difference? Does the amount of sessions make a difference? So basically, how much time would a client need to put in? How much effort would they need to put in? And then lastly, what percentage of my clients drop out? Once I was able to do that analysis, I thought, this is great. I put it in like little pie charts and stuff. And I thought, this is definitely publishable. And I sent it to 10 of my friends, including my wife, my best friend, and all who have seen a psychologist, don't know stats, don't know clinical psychology industry, and every single one of them came back to me saying, I don't know what that means. And that was a huge shock for me. I had statistic numbers and all these things in there. And then basically I gave them everything and they rewrote it, essentially. And they would say, this doesn't make sense to me, or is this what you're talking about? blah, blah, blah. And it molded into a very simplified version, which I could give to the visual designer who made it look all pretty.
Yeah.
And then we got the final outcome.
It's interesting because a lot of times there's those questions that the client, that you mentioned, that the client's going to want to know. Anyone who is sitting in administration or in settings get these questions all the time. How many sessions do I need? That's one of the number one questions that admin manage when a client calls. And we kind of say, oh, I don't know, it just depends. But now you have data to kind of say, well, on average, this is how long that will be.
Yeah. And I think that's the important thing. The word you say there is on average. I do talk to my clients about this stuff, and they might ask that question or a whole range of questions. And I say something similar to this when it's about the session. I say, for my clients with extremely severe distress, what I generally find is that they get the best outcomes when they have more than 10 sessions. With clients with kind of less distress, who are still doing all right in their life and how they feel, they can usually get a good outcome within 5 sessions. I won't know exactly how many sessions you need, but I'll be talking about it with you along the way. And you'll know within the first session whether you sit in that highly distressed or kind of lower distressed client group, and we can work from there.
So basically you're using it as a tool now that you have information. You're using it as a tool to lay out what the client journey might look like so that the client can make an informed decision.
That's exactly right. And they can also, I find this, it's a weird way to put it, but they can call me out as well. Because when we're very vague with our responses, it's not testable. We can't really, our clients say that this isn't what I signed up for. And I guess it's just part of getting, treatment preference for the client, trying to figure out where they want to go. They're just guides for that. And I think if you can give a bit of an idea and keep that communication up, then clients feel like there's been a really transparent transaction between you and them about trying to make them feel better.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. So tell me, in terms of, how you're going to start doing something like this, is there a right way or a wrong way?
I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way. I think because it involves numbers, there's a more accurate way and a less accurate way. And my thinking is that as long as you know if what your stuff is less accurate or more accurate, that's probably more important. For everything that I've put out there, if people have a criticism, and some people do, I can tell them this is where the problems are with every single one of them. And I can let them know exactly what those problems are so they can make the decision for themselves whether to think of it confidently or not at all. I think the number one thing that you do need, though, is data from outcome measures. And it doesn't matter if it's a symptom measure, like the DASS-21, a well-being measure, like the outcome rating scale, a functional measure, like there's a lot of them out there. It doesn't matter what kind of modality you provide or what you value, there's a measure for it. Yeah. So as long as you've got that for the first session and the last session at the end of treatment, then you can do a lot of great work on evaluation.
Yeah, okay. So having some of those data points, you kind of do some strategy with it. It's not sort of, give me an outcome measure, you answer the question, so now I'm going to use that data. It's really about how am I going to implement this into my more clinical workflow processes to make sure it's as accurate as possible.
Absolutely. And to be honest, outcome measures have much more of a benefit for a client on an individual level when you have their data and you can talk about their data. We're not talking about that. We're talking about average across many, maybe even hundreds of clients. And they're more insights for us and to help us to get better as well as to connect with our clients.
Yeah, perfect. And so in terms of your advice and of your best advice on how to do this? I think you might have already answered this in one way, but what it would be your best advice to starting this or tracking the information that you can give to the viewers today?
I think the main thing to start is getting data. And what I would suggest, because I've done this actually too many ways to count, I did paper and pen for a really long time. And there are a lot of benefits of paper and pen. But there are software packages that just make it easier now, and they're reasonably cost affordable, knowing that it improves outcomes. So I'm an agnostic in terms of, you know, what to use, but obviously there's Novacycle, which is an Australian one. There's different measures for an outcome rating scale. You know, I think it's about starting to put that into practice so that down the track you can have a look at an evaluation of your strengths and weaknesses. And this is a really important time because the Royal Commission into Mental Health has said explicitly that they are wanting routine outcome measurement. And then after that, they said to demonstrate the results of treatment. Now, this is for public health, probably more so than private. But what that sentence means is track your outcomes and then evaluate them. So that's a big part of this picture. I think there's going to be more and more of a push, and it's just easier if we're on the bandwagon earlier.
I definitely agree. And so that's sort of the next question that I asked. Sort of, how do tracking outcomes look very different, you know, in the last decade, and where is it going in the future? And you just touched upon this, is that, you know, the public sector is really changing how they're tracking the information. A lot of practices in private practice are getting PHN government funding. You know, Beyond Blue is getting funding. They're looking at outcome measures. So tell us sort of in your experience, you know, like the past decade, what that's looked like, and where, you know, this private practice essentially is going in the next few years or decade.
And maybe I can answer this with a bit of like an anecdote of me and some psychologist friends years ago being in a pub and talking about private practice or public health. And they go, you know, how do you feel you go with your clients? And all of us would say, you know, I think I work really well with clients who are maybe with substance use, or these clients that I'm better with older or younger, or those that are really stuck, whatever it is. When you hear those conversations that I think everyone was having, that's from the clinician point of view. And I think the biggest thing that's changing over the last decade and more is that what we know now is that the clinician view on progress in treatment is less than 5% accurate, which is really, really low. And it's not because we're not good at our jobs, we are, but it's because our brains are hardwired to be looking at different things that kind of mask what's happening for the client. So the biggest change from, you know, decades ago to now is that we're going to focus more on the client self-report, because it's shown to be much more accurate than our report of treatment progress, and as well predictive of good results. So when we say we're taking routine outcome measurement, I think another way to talk about that is just to say we're getting the client's own experience routinely and systematically, and that's just where we're going to go from now on. And I think we're going to do more when we empower the client to have the biggest voice that they possibly can in their treatment.
Yeah. And I think there's also an element to, you know, we're moving more and more into a private health fund for, you know, separate funding sources. And those funding sources are required to make sure they know where their money is going and that they're not sort of wasting the money. And, you know, like in the States, there's a lot of psychoanalytical, psychodynamic therapies that go out, and that's, you know, you don't talk about the number of sessions that you're working with a client, you're talking about the number of years that you're working with a client. And so I think the medical model that's coming that's being introduced essentially here, where we're looking at the 10 sessions, or prior to that it was 12, and prior to that it was 16. Going in the future, it may be 20, it may be 8. We don't really know the number of sessions that Medicare is going to approve going forward. When you dictate your therapy based on the number of approved sessions through Medicare, working effectively with clients gets more and more challenging too, I think. I just kind of wrapping your head around the number of sessions as a clinician would be very hard, I think. Ultimately, you're looking for outcome, not number of sessions with your...
That's exactly right. And, some of the advocacy and paperwork that's gone into Medicare has been large group practices that have evaluated their outcomes and published them to Medicare and said, hey, this is on average how many sessions we're requiring if you want these kind of results. And I think they've been a voice and hopefully continue to be a voice. I think it's really interesting because we're talking about routine outcome monitoring, and you mentioned about psychodynamic, and I'm truly a modality agnostic as well, because often people in other modalities don't think that outcome measurement is relevant. But Tony Rosmanier, who published his outcomes, who I was inspired by, is a brief psychodynamic therapist. And there's more and more people from all different modalities using outcome measurement, but, measuring things that are of value to them and their clients. That certainly doesn't need to be symptom reduction. It can be flourishing. There's a whole host of things that you can measure. And it's not so much about getting everything accurate and right. No number can sum up a human, but at least it's the client's experience. And I think that's just the most important thing.
I love that, actually, because there are a lot of kind of controversy. You mentioned this sort of there's a lot of controversy about, gathering the information and then making it public. And when we were chatting, like when we did our pre sort of interview for this live, we were talking about why you actually put it into a format and published it and what the intention was. So can you share that information with the group here?
Absolutely. So I think what you're referring to is my intention to put it public, and I've had responses from some people around, isn't this marketing essentially? Isn't that what you're doing with this? And I think that's an incredibly important question to ask, because that's not where we want to go with this. So marketing, in my mind, the way I think about it is it's trying to influence someone in one direction. So in the example of a private practice psychologist, influence them to come to me. I am better than, and I'm the best out there, these kind of things. What I hope we can do with our evaluation, certainly what my intention is to show the good, the bad, and the ugly. To have certainly an influence, I think that is important, but that is bi-directional. So what I mean by that is, if I can look at my outcomes and go, I don't like the fact that 11% of his clients deteriorate, that is not acceptable to me, and I will choose someone else accordingly. They might also read it and go, well, Nathan often gets people to do things in between sessions. I get that in the graph it shows that they get better outcomes, double the amount of outcomes, but that's not what I want. And so they might choose someone else. And you can see that while some people may choose to work with me because of the outcomes that are shown, I hope that there is also a proportion of people that are choosing not to. And by definition, getting the best fit for them, because I'm not the best fit for everyone, nor are any of us. So it's just a way of kind of giving all the information to the client and letting them make the decision rather than the other way around.
Well, one of the things I like to talk about with my clients, so clinicians, is understanding, what type of therapist is short-term, medium-term, long-term, mapping out what does that client journey look like and being able to articulate that in a way that your workflow processes, whether it's intake, organization, clinical success, to be able to continue to take the client on the journey. You know that you want to get client outcomes, but the client doesn't necessarily always know. They want to come in, they want you to wave the magic wand, they want you to fix them. And so if you're reporting, you've gone out and said, hey, that's not my style. This, you have to do your homework in between if you're wanting it sort of outcomes when you're working with me. So you've actually been able to educate the client.
Yeah, and that's the hope. You know, again, I'll tack onto that. On average, that's true on average. Some of my clients didn't do anything and they got way better. You know, it absolutely happens. So, you know, that's my hope. And I think as well, one of the things that I struggle with in our field as a whole is how mystical it is. And I know why. It is hard to be transparent exactly about our process. It's very difficult. But it's very hard to navigate our services, number one. Then number two, people are on websites and choosing things like, you know, the information out there is I do emotional focus therapy, or I do psychodynamic, or I do CBT. I'm, you know, self-compassionate, you know, all these different things. I mean, the self-compassion is good. I mean, describing how you are relationally is good. But there's a lot of words there that are very difficult to understand. And I truly don't think that the majority of our clients know what these models are. Number two, even when we say we are whatever, we're usually eclectic. I mean, I've said before in interviews that I'm CBT clinician. I'm really not. I mean, I use ACT and DBT and motivational interviewing, and a lot of people use from disparate other models. So while it might not be the perfect way to provide education, at least it's one way that's widening that. And I really hope that we as a field can figure out more ways to educate our clients about what it is and demystify it a bit.
I love it. I think if anything, I love the idea that you've gone into it with a aspect of self-discovery. You're not saying, I'm doing this because, you know, I'm looking for client outcomes, or you're actually looking for how can I make what I'm doing better? How can I change my experience as a clinician in the longer term client aspect? I love that.
There's a real practical thing for clinicians as well out here. So I can tell you my full evaluation. The data visualization is just a summary, but if you came to me as a client and you had a body image or relationship difficulties, I would also be entering into a conversation that on average, these are my areas that have the least effective. Now, part of that is I'm doing more training in those areas to get better. And that, you know, on an individual basis, we don't know how it's going to go, but we're going to look at it really carefully. And if you're not getting the outcomes, I'll refer you to a specialist if that's what you're wanting, and I'll try and find that for you. So it kind of makes sure that our professional development becomes cost effective. You know, I realize I've been doing heaps of training in OCD, but my outcomes show that I'm pretty good at OCD. So I'm spending a lot of money for something that is not really going to be heightened that much. I'm better off spending money on how does body image impact men and women, and what are some ways to help people with their relationships.
Yeah, I love that. So you're actually going to take us in and show us a live demo. One of the things that we want people to do is have a key takeaway of something that they can do right away. And you have, I wrote this down when we were backstage, you have perfected the art of analytics to the point where you can measure effectiveness in 5 minutes. Absolutely.
It's a quick and dirty way to check your treatment effectiveness in 5 minutes. It's not the perfect way.
Yeah.
My friends who are statisticians, and they would say, Nathan, no, go away for hours and do this. But this is just, I guess, an exercise that anyone can do that is going to take minutes, not hours, and they can at least get a metric. It's not absolutely perfect, but a metric of where they sit in their treatment effectiveness, and hopefully that inspires them to look into all the other details that they can find out about their practice.
Okay, so we're going to grab pen and paper for anyone watching, and you're going to share your screen.
Yeah, I've got my Excel up right now.
All right, I'm going to add that to this system, and I'm going to just show the screen only, so it's in full screen mode. Go ahead.
All right, so this is the finished product of what we're going to do in the next 5 minutes. This is the where I kind of came from in my effectiveness, and you can see here in the orange, my effectiveness is a Collins D. D is a metric of looking at effectiveness between any outcome measure in the world. So it gives an apples to apples comparison. So it's basically taken from meta-analysis studies. Now, you can see there that I'm 1.05. What does that mean? Well, generally speaking, let's take out the low, average, and high effectiveness just for now. We're going to do it, just a very easy one today. 0.8 is where the average psychologist sits and has sat for the last 40 years, since around 1983, when they first did the huge studies of psychological effectiveness in the real world, not in RCTs and everything else. They found that they sit roughly at 0.8 effectiveness, and that has not changed. So I'm going to show you how to figure out your effectiveness by going to this other sheet, and then we're going to compare it to that benchmark of 0.8. So what we've got here is a very simple Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to highlight things. Here are clients. There's 29 clients there. The key to this, to getting an accurate result, is make sure you have more than 60 clients. I've put in 29 so that you can see it on one page, but you need over 60 clients to be able to really confidently feel that this effectiveness is accurate. Next, in the column B, I've used the DAS, but you can use whatever measure you want. I've put in the total score. So the first client there got 29, second got 47. This is their baseline. And you'll notice right down here, we've got an orange area. That means that that client did not complete the routine outcome measure. And it's important to note how many of your clients are not completing it, because that enters bias. You really want as many as possible to have completed the outcome measure. Importantly, these are not my clients. These are made up numbers, made up 29 clients. The last thing you need is the last session routine outcome, okay? So what did they score on the last session when you finished treatment, all right? So we've got those two things. Then we want to have a look and figure out the average of your baseline DAS score, or for you it could be any other measure. And you type in there equals average brackets B2 and then that colon thing, not sure if I'm saying that one right, and B30 and close brackets. B2 is your first client and B30 is your last client, and you're getting an average of those. So on average, your client gets a score of 26.28. You do the exact same thing in this next one, but you do equals average in the brackets C2 to C30, because that's the last score. So on average, the scores go from 26 to 15, a reduction, which is what you're wanting to see on DAS 21. Although with other measures, you might want to go up. Then we want to sort out the standard deviation. So we go equals STDEV, the standard deviation, brackets B2 to B30, and that will calculate that. And then on the last session, we want to do the same thing, equals STDEV, brackets C2 to C30, because that is the last session. Now you have the mean standard deviation of the first and last session of your entire caseload, and you've only got one thing else to do: sort out your effect size. Okay, so your effect size is your treatment effectiveness. All right, on average it's 0.8 for a psychologist, and that's very good, mind you. That's a better effectiveness than Panadol and heart tablets. So what we want to do is we want to enter in equals, and you can see there what it's picking up. So equals C32, it's got to be in this order. C32 is the average score for the last session on the DAS. Then we want to go minus B32, which is the first session on the DAS, and then divided by the standard deviation of the first group of scores on the DAS. We press enter, and what we get is negative 0.8. It's negative because distress goes down in good treatment. So roughly speaking, my treatment effectiveness is 0.8. I sit exactly with most of the group of psychologists on an average psychologist effect score, and that is how you figure out your treatment effectiveness in 5 minutes. If it's less than 0.8, you're a little bit less than average. If it's more than 0.8, you're over average. And if you reach the magical 1.19, you could be considered a super shrink, which has been great research out there of the most effective therapists by Daryl Chow. So hope that is a kind of quick and easy way to look at it once you've got your data. If you're wanting to know more about who's getting better or getting worse, there's other ways to do that as well.
Yeah. I'm going to remove your screen from the thing, but I guess one of the important things is that if people want to know more about this, they can contact you directly. You are not shy to strangers reaching out of the blue saying, hey, I've got some questions about what you're doing. Do you want to chat?
Absolutely. I genuinely, I'm really passionate about this. I want more people to be doing this so that our field gets better for the client that we serve. So if you just have a question on what's this, what's that, just ask me. I'll just give you an answer. It's all good. I work with people all over the world on those kind of things. If you're wanting more assertive help with how to do your evaluation specifically, you can let me know, and I can do that through either supervision or helping you directly with your private practice as well. But at least you have a really good marker with this effect size to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've dropped your email in the FA one to have them reach out by email and ask you any questions. And you are taking on sort of people for supervision and for consulting in their private practices to be able to effectively put something like this in place.
And it just makes you feel confident as well. When I was doing this, I reached out to someone who was really a lead outcomes researcher in this area, and I just did some supervision with him, and for the most part, he was like, yeah, this is perfect. And then he would just give bits along the way. It's actually very doable once you've got someone guiding you. So it also feels nice to be confident in the numbers. Yeah. It's not that fun to have these numbers and go, I don't know how much I should trust them or not.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier, and I think it's really important to kind of reiterate it. It's not actually the numbers themselves that you're saying, okay, this number means this or this number means that. You're getting the numbers together, and then you're pulling the story apart ultimately and saying, okay, this is what they're presenting with, this is where I can have areas of change, or what I can do with this information. You're building a story.
Absolutely. I think there's a theme there, because you know your clients best, and it's absolutely not all diagnostic. I mean, I put that out there because it's just maybe easier. But, sometimes you'll notice that the people that you get the worst outcomes with are, it's a girl who's 18, and she's got depression, and it's a guy who's 54 and he's got OCD, and there's a woman who's 84, and they're various gender, various age, various diagnoses, and you're like, what's happening here? And you might actually notice that they're all from the LGBTQI community. And that could give you some great insight that there's something might be lacking there on their side on how they're feeling about you and the way you're practicing, and getting some training in that as well. I think it's more of a guide. The publishing them, that's not actually that important.
Yeah.
I think that's a wider thing, but evaluating for yourself, that's really important, and it just gives so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that you post a lot of blog articles on your website talking about reporting and just different pieces of information. So if they want to just kind of stop you, they can do that on your blog.
Absolutely. So I've got a blog, Achieving Effective Therapy, and it's not statistical, I will say. It's literally like, what is the experience of myself going through this, or potentially colleagues, or not so much clients, but it's more a narrative around, well, then once you've got this, what happens next, and how does that impact your work?
Perfect. And I don't know, is there anything else that you feel like we might have missed that you want to make sure we touch upon, or?
I think probably the main thing is, well, number one, my full evaluation method, if you really want to get into the stats yourself, is freely available. You get the poster on my website, pull your phone up to it with the camera. On the right-hand side, it's got a QR code, and a PDF will come onto your phone, and it's got the whole method there, all spelt out, if you just want to do the stats yourself. Beyond that, I think it's just getting someone to hold your hand along the way. So once you know what you're doing, you can do that for the rest of your career. And the evaluation space, I guess, really also consolidates our scientist practitioner model that we've come up through training. So it's a nice kind of closed loop on all those years that we did our thesis and our clinical training, and kind of puts that into a meaningful context when we're working with clients.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us. I love your work in its entirety. I think you've been able to really articulate everything that I talk about with my clients, and understanding the data. The data tells us a story, and the data doesn't have to be scary. I think that's the other thing too. Like you mentioned, like holding someone's hand to get it out there. Once it's out there, once you understand it, the story it tells is phenomenal. It's just, mind-blowing.
And it's so good to connect with, what's happening in your work, and to connect with other people that are doing it. That's part of the other reason I put this my email out. There's 6 people in the world currently publishing their outcomes. There's a lot more that are evaluating, of course. But ultimately, I hope the future over the next 10 years is us building a network in Australia of evaluating our outcomes in practice to show the world the amazing work we do.
Yeah, you just are not thanked enough, I think, for the work that you do. So, perfect. Thank you so much for your time. It's been phenomenal having you on, and I can't wait to share this particular video everywhere. I'm going to put it on LinkedIn. We're going to put it on the public page. I absolutely love your work.
I really appreciate that, Tash. It's goes both ways. So thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. All right, we'll see everyone later. Bye.